And that was the turning point in the liberation movement. It was called the pinch of salt heard round the world. Or take my hero, my mentor, Dr. Martin Luther King. Of all the places he could have gone. You know, in 1968, Martin Luther King was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He even came over to Scandinavia to get it. And he was widely recognized as the author of the Civil Rights Bill. He could have retired to Yale and gotten an honorary doctorate, because people were always trying to hand him honorary doctorates, and written a book and had a documentary movie made and retired. He could have. Instead, in 1968, he did two things. He spoke out against the war in Vietnam. And all of his advisors said, don't do it, Dr. King. Don't speak out against the war. We've got a domestic civil rights movement. Don't talk about foreign policy. But Dr. King was not about photo opportunities. He was about conscience. So he spoke out against the war, and that sealed his fate. Exactly 1 year after he spoke out against the war in a public address in New York, exactly 1 year to the hour, he was murdered in Memphis by his own government. But even that wasn't enough. He wanted to start a poor people's campaign. And so he went to Memphis. And all of his advisors say, Dr. King, don't go to Memphis. They're going to kill you in Memphis. Memphis is dangerous. But he said, the garbage workers are striking in Memphis, and they're asking for my help. These are the poorest of the poor. They didn't even have proper shoes. And people would leave an old pair of used shoes out by the garbage as a charitable gift to the garbage men. All the garbage men were black. And they were striking. And Dr. King went and stood with those poorest of the poor in the racist South, in Memphis. And because of that, they killed him there. So understand, friends, that when Jesus made a choice to stand with fishermen, it was a very consequential choice. It had all sorts of political and social ramifications. So that finally brings us to the most highly sentimentalized text in our gospel. Follow me and I will make you fish for people. Isn't that nice? And that text has been interpreted to us by Billy Graham. Hasn't it? Billy Graham owns this text because it means you go out and you save souls. And I know you Church of Sweden people, you're way too sophisticated for saving souls, so it just means trying to get people to church. You try to get them to church, they get in, you have an hour, nobody gets hurt, nobody gets famous, nobody gets saved, and out you go again. But everybody wants to recruit, and this is the most famous recruiting line. And the problem with us Christians is we're illiterate in the story out of which all of the images of the New Testament come from, and that would be the Hebrew Bible. We don't understand that Billy Graham didn't write this text. It actually doesn't refer to a Billy Graham revival. It refers to the prophets. Jeremiah 16:16, I am sending for many fishermen, says Yahweh, and they will catch you. That was a prophetic oracle directed to the elite of his time. I'm sending for peasant fishermen, and they're going to hook you. That's a revolutionary recruiting. But that's not enough. How about the prophet Amos? Hear this word, you who oppress the poor and crush the needy. The time is surely coming when they shall take you away with hooks, every last one of you with hooks. This is militant stuff. This is the wilderness prophets speaking, and they're talking about, how do capitalist software designers call it these days? Repurposing the fishing industry. Oh, but that's not all. We've got Ezekiel. Thus says Yahweh, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. You think you made the Nile. You think all the fish in the Nile belong to you. I will put hooks in your jaws and draw you up from your channels. You see, Yahweh doesn't like the fact that the empire tries to own all the fish. So he's mobilizing the fishermen. Or Habakkuk, the Babylonian tyrant pulls peoples up with fish hooks. He hauls them in his throw net, and because of them he has plenty of food. Will he continue to fill and empty his throw net while he destroys the nations? Here's now a slightly different image of the imperial master fishing for people in order to eat them. Empire as cannibalism. You see, the wilderness prophets, they were playing. They were pissed off. In the tradition, when Jesus says, I will make you fishers of people, it's drawing on this prophetic tradition to make a point about God's coming judgment on all who oppress the poor and the marginalized. You see, Jesus knew his people's literature, but he also sought to bring it back alive in a new context, summoning working folk to join him in overturning the structures of power and privilege in the world in order to restore God's justice. So I suppose in modern parlance we might paraphrase it this way. Jesus said to the fishermen, come on y'all, let's go catch some big fish. No wonder then that Mark reports, not once but twice, and they left their nets and followed Jesus. Have you ever wondered why the response was immediate? No, I know we know the answer to that. The answer is because he was Jesus. And I'm sure he was very famous, and I'm sure he did have a Facebook page. But actually, I think the reason they probably responded immediately to him is because he was talking to them, and he was bringing hope. Not just private hope, but hope for a new way of life. He was respecting their labor and yet saying, we've got to build a movement because the fish actually belong to all of us, and the sea belongs to all of us, and sovereignty belongs only to God. So come on now, let's go catch some big fish. Well, just one footnote to this study, which is kind of interesting. The call of the fishermen is the first discipleship call story in Mark's narrative. The second discipleship call story is with a tax collector. Mark 2:14. He's walking along, still in Capernaum, walking along the sea, and he sees Levi sitting at the tax booth. Now, have a guess who was selling fishing leases. It was the tax collectors. So not only is Jesus targeting the working people who are being marginalized, but he's also targeting the people who are oppressing. And he's calling everybody to a new way of being. Not only that, the really cool thing about this is that he says, follow me. And the next thing we see is everybody's at Levi's house having dinner. Now, you know, Levi lived in the nice part of town. And he had those great smorgasbords. And it wasn't just Jesus coming to join him, was it? It was Jesus and all his funky, smelly, fishing friends. Party at your house, Levi, tonight, and I'm bringing all my friends. Now, there's only one way in which this kind of fellowship that defied class boundaries could have happened. And that is if Levi had been challenged to understand that discipleship for him meant distributing wealth and power, building a new society. And that's our part of the story. That's the Church of Sweden's part of the story. That's my part of the story. Is that not only is Jesus working with poor folks in Tanzania, or in East Timor, or in the Philippines, but Jesus is working with us. But his word to us is, you got to provide hospitality and start sharing the stuff. That's justice right now. Well, I got Emmanuel's invitation to go to Palestine a couple of years ago. And I went. And Elaine and I, while we were there, went to the Church of the Loaves and Fishes. one of the beautiful places right there on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And I love the fact that this church, which is the traditional site of the feeding in the wilderness, has in this Byzantine mosaic right under the altar this symbol, this ancient symbol of the church. Fish and bread. Folks, that's not just a gastronomic symbol. It's a symbol of justice. Our church is about loaves and fishes first, as a symbol of an alternative justice, an alternative society. So, I want to conclude by saying three things. Our invitation, I believe, particularly in our first world countries, is to occupy the gospel. That is, our faith is meant to be discipleship that works for justice for all. That's what it means to follow Jesus today. And our churches need to get that right. Now, there's been a little movement called Occupy Church, and it's sort of nice. One of my favorite slogans is this guy: I threw the money lenders out for a reason. I like that. But Occupy Church, and I really want to invite out all of us to be occupying church. We have to create a culture of peace, value people over profits, equal rights, protection of the environment, and so on and so forth. But of course, the question always is, how do we do that? And so I want to leave you with just two examples, because of course our job is to read the gospel, to recover it from Disneyland, and then to flow out of church onto the streets with the good news. So, to start at home, we could be a little more concerned than perhaps we are about mining on Sami land. That would be a good issue for the church to perhaps be a little more outspoken. Kaisa, are you here? I saw you. Yeah, here's Kaisa Huva. She is Church of Sweden's staff person on Sami issues. Raise your hand. I'll make you do it 3 times. Come out into the light, sister. This is Kaisa. Yeah, she's right there. She's a fantastic person. We met in Palestine, and she took me in a corner and read me the riot act. She said, okay, here's the deal. And I really appreciate that. Thank you, Kaisa. None of us here in Scandinavia should be doing justice work that does not include these issues. Secondly, back to Emmanuel, we can be talking about issues of justice in Palestine and practicing that on the streets of Sweden, and trying to struggle with the challenge of boycott and divestment, and trying to pay attention to how our money, how our wealth and privilege is being used, directly or indirectly, to marginalize people, whether that's in Samiland or whether that's in Palestine or Colombia or wherever it is. Now, I know that you know all these issues, but it is very important that we see these, dear friends, as gospel mandates. This is part of our faith. This is part of our evangelism. This is part of what it means to be church. So I want to thank Marie for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for your witness. We will be having another workshop at 1 o'clock and continue to talk about these things. But let me just say to you, friends, let's all go catch some big fish with Jesus. Amen?